Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy true crime stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. The call came through dispatch at 2:47 a.m. on a freezing February morning in 2019. A correctional officer's voice, strained and barely above a whisper, crackled through the radio. "We have a situation in Range 13. Inmate down. Blood everywhere. Send backup now." Within minutes, the emergency response team stormed through the reinforced steel doors of ADX Florence, the most secure prison on American soil. What they discovered in that 7-by-12-foot concrete cell would expose the dark reality of what happens when the world's most dangerous criminals are locked away together, 23 hours a day, with nothing but time and
The walls
rage.
may hold me,
ADX
but they
Florence
can't
sits in the
silence
barren
the
landscape
truth.
of southern Colorado, a fortress of concrete and steel that disappears into the rocky terrain like a scar on the earth. From the outside, it looks almost ordinary, like any other government facility. But this is no ordinary prison. This is where the United States sends the criminals it cannot risk ever escaping. The drug lords who've built empires on blood. The terrorists who've plotted destruction on a scale that keeps presidents awake at night. The serial killers whose names alone make people lock their doors twice. This is the end of the line. Inside those walls, there are no prison yards where inmates mingle. No cafeteria lines. No workshops or common areas. Each prisoner lives in solitary confinement, a concrete tomb designed to break the human spirit without ever laying a hand on them. The cells are meticulously designed for isolation. A concrete bed. A concrete desk. A concrete stool. A single window, 4 inches wide, positioned so the inmate can see nothing but sky, never knowing where in the
Status
building they
update now.
actually are.
Lockdown protocols
Meals arrive
activated.
through a slot.
Awaiting confirmation.
Showers are
Visuals
taken
clear.
alone,
Proceed with
3
containment.
times a week, in a private stall. Human contact is virtually non-existent. Among the shadows of Range 13 lived some of the most notorious names in criminal history. Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán, the Mexican drug lord who'd escaped maximum security prisons twice before, who'd built tunnels under international borders and bribed entire governments. Theodore Kaczynski, the Unabomber, whose 17-year bombing campaign killed 3 people and injured 23 others while he hid in a remote Montana cabin. Ramzi Youssef, the mastermind behind the 1993 World Trade Center bombing. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, who turned the Boston Marathon into a war zone. These men were not just criminals. They were symbols of terror, rage, and chaos. But on that February morning, something had gone catastrophically wrong. Special Agent Marcus Webb of the FBI's Criminal Investigation Division arrived at ADX Florence by sunrise, his breath forming clouds in the bitter cold. He'd been investigating potential security breaches at federal supermax facilities for months, following whispers of corruption, smuggling, and something even more sinister. Webb was a man who'd seen the worst humanity had to offer, but even he wasn't prepared for what waited inside Range 13. The deceased inmate was Aaron Voss, a 42-year-old white supremacist gang leader serving multiple life sentences for orchestrating murders from behind bars. But Voss wasn't just any gang leader. He was connected, cunning, and had maintained an iron grip on criminal operations across 3 states even from solitary confinement. His cell was supposed to be impenetrable. Video surveillance covered every angle. Guards conducted checks every 30 minutes. Yet somehow, someone had gotten to him. Webb stood at the cell entrance, studying the scene with methodical precision. Voss lay on the concrete floor, his body twisted at an unnatural angle. His face was frozen in an expression of pure terror, eyes wide, mouth open as if he'd died mid-scream. But there were no visible wounds. No blood, despite what the initial report claimed. No signs of struggle. The cell was exactly as it should be, except for one detail that made Webb's blood run cold. Carved into the concrete wall above Voss's bed, fresh and deep, were 4 words that shouldn't have been possible: "They're already inside." Webb's mind raced. How could someone carve into reinforced concrete without tools? How could they do it without being seen on camera? He turned to the warden, a stern woman named Patricia Holbrook who'd run ADX Florence for 7 years without a single escape attempt. Her face was pale, her hands trembling slightly as she held a tablet displaying the security footage from the previous night. "Agent Webb," she said, her voice barely steady, "you need to see this." The footage showed Voss's cell from 11 p.m. until 2:30 a.m. For 3.5 hours, nothing moved. Voss lay on his bed, apparently sleeping. No one entered. No one passed in the corridor. Then, at exactly 2:43 a.m., 4 minutes before the officer's distress call, the camera glitched. Just for 3 seconds. When the image returned, Voss was on the floor, dead, and the message was on the wall. "That's impossible," Webb muttered. 3 seconds isn't enough time for There's more, Holbrook interrupted. She swiped to another camera angle, this one showing the corridor outside Voss's cell. At 2:43 a.m., during those same 3 seconds of static, a shadow appeared on the wall. Not a person. Just a shadow. Moving against the light in a way that defied physics. And then it was gone. Webb felt his throat tighten. Pull the footage from every camera in this range. I want to see everyone who's been near this cell in the past 72 hours. Guards, staff, everyone. As Holbrook worked on the tablet, Webb walked slowly down the corridor of Range 13, studying each cell door. Behind these steel barriers were men who'd orchestrated massacres, built criminal empires, and declared war on civilization itself. Men who'd spent years, sometimes decades, planning, waiting, watching for any weakness in the system. He stopped at cell 1307. The nameplate read, Prisoner 0847, classified. No name. No crime listed. Webb had never seen that before. Warden, who's in this cell? Holbrook's face went white. That cell has been empty since I've been here. Records show it's been vacant for maintenance. Webb moved closer to the door's observation window and peered inside. The cell was identical to all the others. Concrete. Minimal. Isolated. But on the wall, barely visible in the dim light, were scratches. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Covering every surface like ancient hieroglyphics. And in the center of the far wall, written in what looked like dried blood, was a list of names. Aaron Voss was the first name on that list. There were 12 names total. Webb recognized every single one. They were all inmates currently housed in Range 13. All high-value targets. All supposedly untouchable. The second name on the list had a line drawn through it. Webb's radio crackled. Agent Webb, we have another situation. Cell 1319. Inmate unresponsive. Same condition as Voss. The name on cell 1319 matched the second name on the blood-written list. Webb's hands went cold. This wasn't a murder. This was an execution. Someone, or something, was systematically eliminating prisoners inside the most secure facility on Earth. And they were just getting started. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he'd hoped never to use. When the voice answered, Webb spoke 4 words that would launch the most classified investigation in Bureau history: we have a ghost inside. But when they pulled the records for cell 1307, the one supposedly empty for maintenance, what they found in the classified database made Webb understand they weren't dealing with a ghost at all. They were dealing with something far more dangerous. Something that had been waiting in that cell, in plain sight, for exactly this moment. The classified file that appeared on Agent Webb's encrypted laptop at 4:37 a.m. carried a designation he'd only seen twice in his 15-year career, Umbra Black. The highest level of classification in the federal prison system, reserved for inmates whose very existence posed a national security threat. As Webb read through the document in Warden Holbrook's office, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead, he felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Colorado winter. Cell 1307 wasn't empty. It never had been. The prisoner inside was named Dr. Elias Crane, a former CIA psychological operations specialist who'd been convicted 8 years ago of crimes so disturbing that his trial was held entirely in sealed federal court. No media coverage. No public record. Just a quiet transfer to ADX Florence and a file that disappeared into the classified archives. According to the documentation, Crane had been a pioneer in psychological warfare, developing interrogation techniques that could break even the most hardened operatives. But somewhere along the way, he'd crossed a line that even the intelligence community couldn't ignore. What did he do? Holbrook asked, her voice trembling as she read over Webb's shoulder. Webb scrolled through the redacted pages, his jaw tightening with each revelation. In 2016, Crane was assigned to a black site operation in Eastern Europe. His job was to extract information from high-value targets using advanced psychological manipulation. But he went rogue. Started conducting unauthorized experiments. He discovered that through specific combinations of sensory deprivation, subliminal messaging, and what he called neural-linguistic warfare, he could essentially program people to do whatever he wanted. Turn them into weapons without them ever knowing they'd been compromised. That's not possible, Holbrook said, but her voice lacked conviction. The CIA thought so too, until 3 of Crane's subjects walked into separate government facilities across 2 continents and simultaneously executed coordinated attacks. They had no memory of being programmed. No awareness of what they'd done until it was over. Crane had turned human beings into remote-controlled assassins using nothing but words, sounds, and psychological conditioning. Webb paused, his finger hovering over a particular passage. When they finally caught him, he was running a network of 23 activated subjects. They never found all of them. Holbrook's face went ashen. You're telling me we've had a man who can program people to kill, locked in solitary confinement, in a facility full of the most dangerous criminals on Earth? For 8 years, Webb confirmed. And according to this file, he's been completely compliant. Model prisoner. Never caused a single problem. Until now. The warden pulled up the security protocols on her computer. He's had zero contact with other inmates. We follow strict isolation procedures. He takes his meals alone, showers alone, exercises alone in a private cage. The only people he ever sees are guards during cell checks, and those interactions last less than 30 seconds. 30 seconds is all he needs, Webb said grimly. Crane doesn't need hours of therapy sessions or prolonged contact. His techniques work on a subconscious level. A specific phrase. A particular tone. A pattern of sounds that bypasses conscious awareness and plants commands directly into the primitive brain. The guards probably don't even know they've been compromised. Webb stood and walked to the window overlooking the prison complex. Dawn was breaking over the mountains, casting long shadows across the concrete fortress. Somewhere in that maze of cells and corridors, 12 men were marked for death, and the killer was orchestrating it all from inside a 7-by-12-foot concrete box. We need to interview every guard who's had contact with Crane in the past 6 months. And we need to do it now. By 7 a.m., Webb had assembled a team of FBI agents and prison security personnel in a secure conference room. The guards who'd worked Range 13 were brought in one by one for questioning. Each interview followed the same disturbing pattern. The guards remembered their interactions with Crane, but they all described them the same way: unremarkable, routine, forgettable. None of them could recall specific conversations. When pressed for details, they became confused, agitated, defensive. Officer Derek Martinez, a 10-year veteran of ADX Florence, sat across from Webb with sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool temperature. "I don't understand what you want me to tell you," Martinez said, his hands fidgeting on the table. "Crane is just another inmate. I do my rounds, I check his cell, I move on." "Does he ever speak to you?" Webb asked. "Sometimes. Small talk. Nothing important." "What does he say?" Martinez's eyes went distant, unfocused. I don't remember. Just, general stuff." Webb leaned forward. "Officer Martinez, I need you to think carefully. Has Crane ever asked you to do anything? Even something small? Something that seemed harmless?" The officer's face contorted with effort, like he was trying to recall a dream that was slipping away. There was one thing. About 3 months ago. He asked if I could adjust the timing of his cell checks. Said the current schedule was disrupting his sleep pattern. Wanted them to happen at specific times. Martinez's voice dropped to a whisper. "I thought it was reasonable. Medical issue. So I changed the schedule. Just for him." Webb's blood went cold. "What times did he request?" Martinez pulled out his duty log, his hands shaking. 11 p.m., 2:30 a.m., and 6 a.m. Those were the exact times between the murders. Crane had engineered gaps in the surveillance, windows of opportunity where his programmed operatives could act. Webb stood abruptly. "We need to lock down the entire facility. No one enters or leaves Range 13. And we need to talk to Crane. Now." The walk to cell 1307 felt like descending into a tomb. The corridor was silent except for the echo of footsteps and the occasional distant clang of metal on metal. Webb wore a body camera and a panic button. 2 armed guards flanked him. Warden Holbrook monitored everything from the control room, ready to flood the area with gas if anything went wrong. When Webb reached the cell, he peered through the observation window. Dr. Elias Crane sat on his concrete bed, perfectly still, hands folded in his lap. He was in his late 50s, with silver hair, sharp features, and eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He looked like a college professor, not a monster who'd turned human beings into unconscious weapons. "Dr. Crane," Webb said through the intercom. "I'm Special Agent Marcus Webb, FBI. I need to ask you some questions." Crane's head turned slowly toward the door. When he smiled, it was the smile of someone who'd been expecting this visit for a very long time. Agent Webb. I've been wondering when you'd finally come to see me. Please, don't be shy. We have so much to discuss. 2 inmates are dead. Murdered in their cells. You're going to tell me how and why. Am I?" Crane's voice was smooth, measured, almost hypnotic. "That's a rather bold assumption. I've been locked in the cell, as you can see. I have no weapons. No tools. No contact with other prisoners. How could I possibly be responsible?" "You programmed the guards," Webb said flatly. "You used your techniques to turn them into unwitting accomplices." Crane laughed, a sound like ice cracking. "Such imagination, Agent Webb. But let's say, hypothetically, that I possessed such abilities. Why would I waste them on killing fellow inmates? What could I possibly gain from that? Webb felt something shift in the air, a subtle change in pressure that made his skin crawl. Crane's eyes locked onto his through the window, and for a moment, Webb felt as if the man was reaching into his skull, probing his thoughts. He forced himself to maintain eye contact, refusing to look away. "You're sending a message," Webb said. "Proving you still have power. That even here, in the most secure prison on Earth, you can reach out and touch anyone you want." "Closer," Crane said, his smile widening. "But still not quite there. Tell me, Agent Webb, have you considered why those particular inmates? Aaron Voss, a white supremacist gang leader. Marcus Stone, a cartel enforcer who betrayed his own family. Both men of violence. Both men who've caused immeasurable suffering. Some might say they got exactly what they deserved." "You're not judge and jury," Webb shot back. "Neither are you," Crane countered. "Yet here we are, having this conversation through a steel door because society decided I was too dangerous to walk free. We're all prisoners of someone else's judgment, Agent Webb. The only question is whether we accept that judgment or fight against it." Webb felt his heart rate increasing, a strange buzzing sensation at the base of his skull. He realized with horror that Crane was doing it right now, weaving patterns into his speech, using tone and rhythm to bypass conscious defenses. He stepped back from the door. "This interview is over." "Oh, but we're just getting started," Crane said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried perfectly through the intercom. "You see, Agent Webb, you've made a critical error. You assumed I was the architect of what's happening in Range 13. But I'm not the architect. I'm just the blueprint. The real question you should be asking is, who's holding the pen?" Before Webb could respond, the lights in the corridor flickered and died. Emergency backup lights kicked in, casting everything in a sickly red glow. His radio exploded with panicked voices. "Control, we have multiple incidents. Cells 1315, 1318, and 1321. Inmates down. Same pattern. No signs of entry. This is happening right now." Webb spun toward the control room, his heart hammering. 3 more deaths. 3 more names from the list. That meant they were moving faster, accelerating the timeline. He turned back to Crane's cell, but the window was dark. He could barely make out the silhouette of the man inside, still sitting on his bed, still perfectly calm. "Dr. Crane, if you have any information that could stop this, you need to tell me now." The voice that came through the intercom was different now, layered with something ancient and terrible. "Stop it? Agent Webb, I don't want to stop it. This is just the beginning. You're focused on 12 names in Range 13, but you're thinking too small. Too local. Tell me, how many guards work at ADX Florence? How many administrative staff? How many contractors, delivery personnel, maintenance workers? How many people pass through these walls every single day?" Webb felt his stomach drop. "What have you done?" "I've planted seeds," Crane said. "For 8 years, I've been planting seeds. Every guard who checked my cell. Every doctor who examined me. Every administrator who reviewed my file. Each interaction was brief, forgettable, meaningless. But the human mind is a fascinating thing, Agent Webb. It doesn't just forget. It stores. It archives. It waits for the right trigger to bring buried commands back to the surface." "You're lying," Webb said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Am I? Then explain how inmates in completely separate cells, with no contact to each other or the outside world, are dying simultaneously. Explain how someone carved a message into concrete without tools. Explain why you can't remember the last 30 seconds of our conversation." Webb's blood turned to ice. He couldn't remember. The last thing he recalled clearly was stepping back from the door. Everything after that was a blur, like someone had taken an eraser to his memory. "You felt it, didn't you?" Crane continued. "That little buzzing sensation at the base of your skull. That's your mind trying to resist the programming. But it's already too late. The seed is planted. The question now is, what will make it grow? What trigger will activate what I've put inside your head?" Webb stumbled backward, his hand going to his sidearm. The guards rushed forward, but he waved them off. "Get back. Don't listen to him. Don't let him talk to you." But Crane's laughter echoed through the corridor, bouncing off concrete walls, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "You can't unhear what's already been heard, Agent Webb. You can't unlearn what's already been learned. And you certainly can't stop what's already in motion." Webb ran toward the control room, his mind racing. If Crane was telling the truth, if he'd been programming people for 8 years, then the scope of this went far beyond a few dead inmates. It meant there were dozens, maybe hundreds of people walking around with buried commands in their subconscious, waiting to be activated. Prison staff. FBI agents. Anyone who'd ever had contact with this monster. When he burst into the control room, Warden Holbrook was on 3 phones simultaneously, coordinating responses to the new deaths. The security monitors showed chaos erupting throughout Range 13. More inmates down. Guards running. Alarms blaring. It was escalating out of control. "We need to evacuate," Webb said. "Get everyone out of Range 13. Lock it down completely." "We can't," Holbrook said, her face pale. "The automated lock systems aren't responding. Someone's overridden the controls. We're locked in with them." Webb looked at the monitors, watching as more red lights appeared on the grid, indicating more deaths, more chaos. And then he saw something that made his blood run cold. On the monitor showing Crane's cell, the prisoner was standing now, facing the camera directly. His lips were moving, forming words, but there was no audio. Yet somehow, Webb could hear them in his head, clear as day. "Phase 2 begins at midnight. Everyone you trust is already compromised. Including you." The monitor went black. Every screen in the control room simultaneously cut to static. And in that moment of darkness, Webb realized they weren't investigating murders in a maximum security prison. They were trapped inside an experiment. And Dr. Elias Crane, the architect of chaos, had been running it all along. When the screens flickered back to life, showing the corridor outside cell 1307, the door was standing wide open. The cell was empty. And on every wall, written in that same dried blood, was a single word repeated hundreds of times: awaken. The emergency sirens wailed through ADX Florence like the screams of dying ghosts, but Agent Webb barely heard them. His eyes were fixed on the empty cell where Dr. Elias Crane should have been, his mind struggling to process the impossible. The cell door hadn't been breached. The reinforced steel showed no signs of tampering, no burn marks from cutting tools, no damage from explosives. The locks were still engaged. Yet somehow, Crane had simply vanished from a room designed to hold the world's most dangerous criminals until the day they died. "How long has he been gone?" Webb demanded, his voice cutting through the chaos in the control room. Warden Holbrook frantically scrolled through security logs, her fingers trembling on the keyboard. According to the system, the door never opened. The locks were never disengaged. But the timestamp on the camera shows, 3 minutes ago. He was there, and then he wasn't. Webb's mind raced back to what Crane had said: "Everyone you trust is already compromised. Including you." He looked around the control room at the faces of the security personnel, the guards, the administrative staff. Any one of them could be a sleeper agent, programmed years ago, waiting for Crane's trigger word to activate buried commands. Trust had become a luxury they couldn't afford. "Initiate full lockdown protocol," Webb ordered. "No one enters or leaves this facility. I want every corridor sealed, every cell door verified, and every staff member accounted for. And someone tell me how many people are still alive in Range 13. The answer came back within seconds, delivered by a young tech operator whose face had gone gray with shock. "Sir, we're showing 9 inmates deceased. 3 survivors remaining. But there's something else. The automated life support monitoring systems in all the other ranges, they're showing anomalies. Heart rate spiking. Unusual brain activity patterns. It's happening throughout the entire facility." Webb felt the ground shift beneath him. Crane wasn't just targeting Range 13. He was activating his network facility-wide. Every person he'd ever had contact with, every guard who'd done a routine cell check, every doctor who'd performed a medical examination, every administrator who'd processed his paperwork over 8 years. They were all potential weapons, and Crane had just pulled the trigger. "Get me a list of every staff member who's had contact with Crane since his arrival," Webb commanded. "Cross-reference it with their current locations and..." The lights went out. Not just in the control room, but everywhere. The emergency backup systems that should have kicked in remained dark. For 5 seconds that felt like an eternity, ADX Florence was plunged into absolute blackness. When the lights flickered back on, half the security monitors were dead, and the ones that remained showed a scene that would haunt Webb for the rest of his life. Throughout the prison, guards were opening cell doors. Not randomly, but systematically, moving from cell to cell with the mechanical precision of programmed robots. Their faces were blank, emotionless masks. They weren't responding to radio calls or commands from their supervisors. They were simply executing a protocol that had been buried in their subconscious, waiting for this exact moment. "Stop them!" Holbrook screamed into her radio. "All units, stop the door releases immediately." But the guards kept moving, kept opening doors, releasing some of the most dangerous human beings ever locked away. El Chapo. Ramzi Youssef. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. The Unabomber. Men who'd killed thousands, destroyed lives, shattered families. Men who'd been safely contained were now being systematically freed by their own captors. Webb grabbed Holbrook's arm. Where would Crane go? If he's out, where would he head? The warden's eyes went wide with realization. The communication center. If he gets access to the main server, he can broadcast to the entire facility. Every screen, every speaker, every intercom. He could activate everyone at once. They ran. Webb, Holbrook, and 2 FBI agents sprinted through corridors that now felt like alien landscapes, every shadow a potential threat, every corner hiding possible danger. The prison had transformed from a fortress of order into a labyrinth of chaos. They passed cells with open doors, past guards standing motionless in the middle of hallways, past inmates who watched them run by with expressions of pure, predatory hunger. The communication center was located in the administrative wing, accessible through a series of security checkpoints that required biometric verification and encrypted codes. But when they arrived, the security doors were standing open, the keypad panels torn from the walls. Someone with intimate knowledge of the facility's layout had been there first. Webb entered with his weapon drawn, the 2 agents flanking him. The communication center was a maze of servers, monitors, and broadcast equipment that controlled every digital system in the prison. And standing at the main terminal, his fingers dancing across the keyboard with the confidence of someone who'd planned this moment for years, was Dr. Elias Crane. "Agent Webb," Crane said without turning around. "Right on schedule. I must say, your predictability has been one of the most useful tools in this entire operation." "Step away from the terminal," Webb commanded, his gun trained on Crane's back. "It's over." Crane laughed, the sound echoing through the equipment racks. "Over? My dear agent, it's just beginning. You're still thinking small. Still focused on this building, these inmates, this moment. But I've been thinking so much bigger." He turned to face them, and his eyes gleamed with a terrible intelligence. "Tell me, how many people work at ADX Florence?" 350 staff, Holbrook said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And how many of them have families? Friends? Social connections that extend into the outside world?" Crane smiled. "The human brain is a broadcasting station, Agent Webb. Every person who leaves this facility carries my programming with them. They go home to their spouses, their children, their communities. They interact with police officers, judges, politicians, military personnel. The infection spreads exponentially, each carrier creating new carriers, until the network becomes self-sustaining." Webb felt his finger tighten on the trigger. "You're insane." "I'm efficient," Crane corrected. "For 8 years, I've had nothing but time to refine my techniques, to perfect the delivery mechanism, to engineer the perfect psychological contagion. Every word was carefully chosen. Every interaction precisely calibrated. I didn't need violence or coercion. I just needed patience and access to the one resource this prison had in abundance, human contact." "What do you want?" Webb demanded. "What's the end game?" Crane's expression softened into something almost sympathetic. "Want? I don't want anything, Agent Webb. I'm simply demonstrating a principle. That control is an illusion. That security is a fantasy. That the systems we build to contain chaos are themselves the greatest sources of chaos. Look around you. The most secure prison ever constructed, defeated not by tunnels or bribes or force, but by the simple act of conversation." He pressed a key on the terminal, and every screen in the communication center lit up simultaneously. "I'm about to broadcast a message to every person in this facility. Staff and inmates alike. It will be heard in cell blocks, control rooms, administrative offices, the cafeteria, the medical wing, everywhere. The message contains the master trigger, the phrase that will activate every sleeper agent I've created over the past 8 years. 350 staff members, all acting in perfect coordination, all following a singular purpose." "Which is what?" Holbrook asked, her voice cracking. "Freedom," Crane said simply. "Not just for me, but for everyone. True freedom, the kind that comes when all the rules collapse, when the structures that hold civilization together dissolve. You've built this fortress to contain chaos, but you've actually concentrated it, distilled it into its purest form. And now I'm going to release it." Webb didn't hesitate. He fired 3 times, center mass, textbook shots that should have dropped Crane instantly. But the man didn't fall. He stood there, looking down at his chest where the bullets should have struck, and smiled. "You're not really here, are you, Agent Webb?" The world shifted. Webb looked down at his hands and saw they were trembling, phasing in and out of focus like a bad television signal. The communication center around him began to warp and distort, walls bending, equipment melting into impossible shapes. He tried to speak, but his voice came out garbled, distorted. "You were triggered the moment you looked into my cell," Crane's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. "Every word I spoke, every gesture, every moment of eye contact was programming you. You're not in the communication center, Agent Webb. You're standing in an empty corridor, having a conversation with a wall. Everything you've experienced in the last 20 minutes has been a hallucination, a narrative I planted in your mind. Webb felt reality cracking around him. He turned to the agents beside him, but their faces were blurring, becoming indistinct. He reached for Holbrook, but his hand passed through her like she was made of smoke. No, he whispered. This isn't real. This can't be real. Reality is negotiable, Crane's voice whispered in his ear. That's the lesson. That's what I've been trying to teach you. The mind doesn't distinguish between experience and memory, between perception and imagination. Given the right stimulus, I can make you believe anything. Do anything. Be anything. The hallucination shattered like glass. Webb found himself standing in corridor 1300, alone, his gun pointed at nothing but empty air. Around him, prison alarms blared, but the chaos he'd witnessed, the open cells and programmed guards, none of it had happened. Not yet. He looked at his watch. Only 30 seconds had passed since he'd first looked into Crane's cell. His radio crackled. It was Holbrook's voice, calm and professional. Agent Webb, please report to your location. You missed your last check-in. Webb staggered backward, his mind reeling. Had he imagined everything? The murders, the investigation, the confrontation with Crane? Or was this the hallucination, and everything else was real? He couldn't tell anymore. Crane had broken something fundamental in his perception, and there was no way to know what was true. He approached cell 1307 with cautious steps. Through the observation window, he could see Crane sitting on his bed, hands folded in his lap, exactly as he'd been when Webb first arrived. The man looked up and smiled, that same terrible smile that seemed to reach inside Webb's skull. Welcome back, Crane said through the intercom. How many times have we had this conversation now? 5? 10? 100? You keep resetting, keep trying to find the reality where you stop me, where you win. But here's the thing about my programming, Agent Webb, it doesn't just change what you perceive. It changes how you perceive. Every loop teaches you less, not more. Every iteration takes you further from the truth. Webb's hands were shaking. He pulled out his phone and checked the date. Wednesday, December 24, 2025. But something felt wrong about that date. He tried to remember how long he'd been investigating ADX Florence. Days? Weeks? The memories were there, but they felt thin, like tissue paper that might tear if he examined them too closely. The beautiful irony, Crane continued, is that you're so focused on stopping me that you haven't asked the most important question. If I can do this to you, who else have I done it to? Your team. Your supervisors. The people who sent you here. How do you know any of them are real? How do you know I'm not just a story someone else planted in your mind? Webb felt vertigo washing over him. He stumbled backward, hit the wall, slid down to the floor. Around him, the prison continued its routine operations. Guards walked their rounds. Cells remained locked. Everything was normal. Everything was fine. But underneath that normalcy, he could feel something writhing, something vast and terrible that he couldn't quite see. His phone rang. It was his supervisor at FBI headquarters. Webb, we're pulling you off the ADX Florence investigation. There's been a development. 9 inmates were found deceased this morning in a coordinated incident. We need you to. Webb hung up. The investigation was just beginning. Or it had ended yesterday. Or it was happening right now in multiple timelines simultaneously. He'd lost the thread, lost the ability to distinguish between the real and the programmed. He looked up at Crane's cell one more time. The prisoner was standing now, pressed against the observation window, his face inches from the glass. Do you want to know the truth, Agent Webb? The real truth? Yes, Webb whispered. There is no truth, Crane said. There's only perception. And I control your perception. I have from the moment you stepped into this prison. Every dead inmate, every open cell, every word I've spoken to you has been calibrated to lead you here, to this moment, where you finally understand that you're not investigating me. You're part of the experiment. You always have been. Webb closed his eyes. When he opened them, he was sitting in a debriefing room at FBI headquarters. 6 months had passed. The ADX Florence incident was over. Crane was still in his cell, still locked away, still under 24-hour surveillance. 9 inmates had died, their deaths attributed to a sophisticated poisoning scheme involving compromised medication. Several guards had been arrested for smuggling contraband. The official report made no mention of mind control or psychological programming. But Webb knew better. He knew because every night when he closed his eyes, he heard Crane's voice whispering in the darkness. He knew because sometimes he'd lose time, wake up in places he didn't remember going, with tasks completed he didn't remember doing. He knew because when he looked in the mirror, sometimes his reflection smiled at him with Crane's terrible smile. The official word was that Webb had cracked the case, stopped a major security breach, and saved countless lives. They gave him a commendation. A promotion. A corner office with a view of the Potomac. But he knew the truth. Or at least, he knew what Crane wanted him to think was the truth. 3 months later, Webb was assigned to investigate a series of unusual incidents at federal facilities across the country. Prisons, courthouses, government offices. In each location, staff members were exhibiting strange behavior. Following unknown protocols. Executing tasks they had no memory of being assigned. The pattern was spreading, exactly as Crane had predicted. Webb opened his case file and saw a note he didn't remember writing. Phase 2 begins at midnight. Everyone you trust is already compromised. Including you. His phone rang. It was Warden Holbrook. Agent Webb, we have a situation at ADX Florence. Cell 1307. When the guards went for their morning check, they found something carved into the concrete wall. What did it say? Webb asked, though he already knew the answer. Thank you for letting me out. But Agent Webb, that's impossible. Crane is still in his cell. We verified it personally. He never escaped. He's been there the whole time. Webb hung up the phone and walked to his office window. Below him, the streets of Washington, D.C. were full of people going about their daily lives. Lawyers and politicians, police officers and federal agents, normal citizens living normal lives. But Webb wondered how many of them were carrying Crane's programming. How many had been activated without knowing it? How many were sleepers, waiting for the right trigger to turn them into something else? His reflection in the window smiled back at him, and for just a moment, he saw Crane's face instead of his own. That night, Webb's supervisor called him into her office for what she said would be a routine performance review. But when he arrived, he found 20 people waiting for him. Senior agents, department heads, people he'd worked with for years. They were all sitting perfectly still, hands folded in their laps, staring at him with expressions that were simultaneously familiar and completely alien. His supervisor stood and smiled. Agent Webb, we need to discuss your investigation into ADX Florence. You've been asking uncomfortable questions. Making connections we'd prefer remained unconnected. We think it's time you understood the bigger picture. As she spoke, Webb realized with growing horror that her speech patterns matched Crane's exactly. The cadence, the rhythm, the precise selection of words designed to bypass conscious resistance. They were all programmed. The entire leadership of his division. Maybe the entire bureau. How far up did it go? How long had it been going on? Dr. Crane isn't the architect, his supervisor said. He's the prototype. We've been refining his techniques, expanding his methods, preparing for a much larger implementation. And you, Agent Webb, you're going to help us. Whether you want to or not. Webb tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move. He tried to speak, but his voice wouldn't come. He tried to think, but his thoughts were becoming fuzzy, distant, like someone else's memories bleeding into his consciousness. The programming was taking hold, the seeds Crane had planted finally blooming into full control. The last thing Webb remembered thinking, before his mind folded in on itself and reshaped into something that served a different master, was a question: if Crane could program people with brief conversations through a prison cell door, what could he do with an entire system designed to give him access to thousands of trained law enforcement agents? The answer came in whispers, in shadows, in the spaces between reality and nightmare. Crane hadn't escaped from ADX Florence. He'd never needed to. He'd been broadcasting his influence through every person he'd ever touched, using them as relay stations to spread his psychological contagion across the country. The prison wasn't containing him. It was amplifying him. 6 months after Webb's last coherent memory, a classified report was filed with the Department of Justice. It noted unusual patterns in federal prison operations nationwide. Guards exhibiting synchronized behavior. Inmates being systematically relocated without proper authorization. Security protocols being modified by personnel who claimed to have no memory of making the changes. The report recommended an immediate investigation. But the agents assigned to investigate were all people who'd had contact with someone who'd had contact with someone who'd had contact with Dr. Elias Crane. The infection was already complete. The network was already active. And somewhere in cell 1307 of ADX Florence, a man sat in perfect stillness, smiling at a wall, knowing that the real prison had never been concrete and steel. It had always been the human mind. And he'd just figured out how to break free from every single one. The truth that no one wanted to admit was simple and terrifying. Dr. Elias Crane was never actually in ADX Florence. The real Crane had died 8 years ago, during his initial arrest. The person in cell 1307 was just the first successfully programmed subject, living out Crane's final instructions, continuing his work, spreading his influence. The real experiment wasn't testing whether one man could control others from prison. It was testing whether an idea, properly engineered and precisely delivered, could become immortal. And the answer, as thousands of sleeper agents across the country slowly awakened to their true purpose, was yes. In the end, the most secure prison ever built didn't fail because of tunnels or bribes or violence. It failed because it never understood what it was actually trying to contain. Not a man. Not even an idea. But a virus of consciousness itself, patient and persistent, waiting for the perfect moment to transform every cage into a doorway. The last entry in Agent Webb's personal journal, written in a handwriting that looked like his but felt wrong somehow, contained only 5 words: "We are all Crane now."